The morning sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows of St. Cecilia's Home for Girls, casting a kaleidoscope of colors across the polished wooden pews. Sister Margaret Donovan stood at the altar, her voice solemn yet steady as she concluded the annual memorial prayer service. "May the souls of the departed through the mercy of God rest in peace," she intoned, making the sign of the cross before her. "Amen." The congregation responded in unison. Sister Margaret looked out at the assembled faces, many elderly, some middle-aged, and a few younger community members. All had gathered on this somber day to remember the 12 orphan girls who had vanished without a trace exactly 27 years ago. The mystery had haunted the small town of Millfield, Maine, for nearly 3 decades now. As the service ended, Sister Margaret moved to the chapel entrance, greeting each member of the congregation as they filed out. Many offered condolences, though after 27 years, the words had taken on a ritualistic quality rather than carrying the raw emotion of fresh grief. "Thank you for coming, Mrs. Hargrove," Sister Margaret said, clasping the elderly woman's wrinkled hands in her own. "Your presence means a great deal." "I always come, Sister," she replied, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I can still remember teaching little Emma piano lessons. Such a gentle soul." Sister Margaret nodded, feeling the familiar pang of sorrow. Emma Johnston had been just 11 when she disappeared, a life barely begun cut short by whatever tragedy had befallen her and the other 11 girls. One by one, the parishioners departed, each carrying a different memory of the missing children. Emma Johnston, 11, Lily Chen, 12, Sarah Williams, 10, Maria Rodriguez, 13, Catherine Lewis, 9, Abigail Parker, 12, Hannah Wilson, 10, Grace Turner, 11, Zoe Campbell, 13, Olivia Bennett, 12, Isabella Murphy, 10, and the youngest, Rebecca Donovan, just 8 years old. For Sister Margaret, the wound ran deepest. Rebecca, Becca as she'd called her, had been her biological niece, her sister's only child. After her sister's death in a car accident, Sister Margaret had arranged for Becca to come to St. Cecilia's, hoping to provide stability while maintaining a connection to her only living relative. Instead, Becca's disappearance had shaken Sister Margaret's faith to its core. When the last of the congregation had left, Sister Margaret slowly made her way back through the now empty chapel. Her footsteps echoed in the silence as she moved toward her private office at the rear of the building. The space was modestly furnished with a simple desk, a bookshelf filled with theological texts, and a window overlooking what had once been the playground. Alone at last, Sister Margaret sank into her chair and buried her face in her hands. Picard, composed facade she maintained for her parishioners crumbled away, leaving only a woman consumed by grief and unanswered questions. "Why, Lord?" she whispered, her voice ragged with emotion. "I have served you faithfully all these years. My niece was an innocent child. Why have you not led me to her? What lesson am I failing to learn from this trial?" Tears leaked between her fingers as her shoulders shook with silent sobs. She rarely allowed herself this moment of weakness, but the anniversary always stripped away her carefully constructed defenses. After several minutes, Sister Margaret drew a deep breath and wiped her eyes. She opened the bottom drawer of her desk and removed a small wooden box. Inside lay several photographs, preserved with loving care despite the passage of years. The first was of Becca on her 8th birthday, just 2 weeks before she vanished. Her young face beamed with joy beneath a paper crown, and Sister Margaret felt both love and a stab of guilt as she gazed at the image. She had been the one to place her niece at St. Cecilia's, to entrust her care to the institution. "I was so proud of you," she murmured to the photograph. "I still am." The thought that had haunted her for 27 years crept into her mind. If she hadn't placed Becca at St. Cecilia's after her sister's death, would she still be here today? Would she be a teacher, a mother, alive and well? "In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit," Sister Margaret said sharply, making the sign of the cross to banish the treacherous thought. She could not allow herself to question God's plan, even in her darkest moments. Setting aside Becca's photograph, she reached for another, the last known image of the 12 missing girls. They stood together on the steps of St. Cecilia's East Wing, the oldest section of the campus, built in the 1890s. The younger girls sat on the steps while the older ones stood behind them, some smiling, others serious, all unaware of the fate that awaited them. The photograph had been taken by a visiting benefactor just days before the girls disappeared. They had been temporarily housed in the East Wing while the main dormitories underwent renovations. 2 days later, all 12 vanished without a trace. Sister Margaret stared at the image, her mind drifting to calculations she'd made countless times before. Emma would be 38 now, Lily 39, Maria 40, and Becca, her little Becca, would be 35. Still young, still with so much life ahead of her, if by some miracle she had survived whatever befell her. She remembered the frantic days and weeks after their disappearance. The police had searched the grounds extensively, combing through every building, every closet, every crawl space. Search parties had spread out through surrounding farms, villages and woods, but not a single clue had emerged. No scraps of clothing, no personal effects, no signs of struggle. It was as if the 12 girls had simply vanished into thin air. The official theory had eventually settled on a group abduction, possibly by a trafficking ring. Perhaps a staff member had been complicit, or security had been breached from outside, but the complete absence of evidence had always made this explanation feel hollow to Sister Margaret, and to many others as well. Over the years, uglier rumors had circulated, whispers that the girls had been victims of ritualistic violence or that they had run away to escape abuse within the institution. Sister Margaret and the church had worked tirelessly to quash such speculation, but the seeds of doubt had been planted in the community nonetheless. Becca would never have run away, she whispered, tracing her niece's face in the photograph. She would never have left without telling me. As she continued to gaze at the photograph, her eyes drifted to the East Wing in the background. St. Cecilia's East Wing had been a Gothic revival structure built in the 1890s to house the first generation of orphan girls at the institution. Its stone walls and modest bell tower were visible behind the children, surrounded by the looming pines that marked the edge of the property. Something tugged at Sister Margaret's heart as she studied the building. She hadn't visited the East Wing property in over 20 years, finding the memories too painful to bear. The wing had been sold and demolished shortly after the disappearances, deemed unsafe due to structural issues and a painful reminder of the tragedy. But now, on this anniversary, she felt a strange urge to see it again, to walk where Becca had walked, to pray where she had prayed. Perhaps it was mere sentimentality, a desire to feel close to her niece on this difficult day. Or perhaps a small voice whispered in the back of her mind, there was still something to be discovered there, some clue overlooked in the initial investigation. The latter thought was almost certainly foolish. What could possibly remain to be found after 27 years? Yet the pull was undeniable. Sister Margaret carefully replaced the photographs in the box, except for the one of the 12 girls at the East Wing, which she slipped into her pocket. She rose from her desk, collected her Bible and rosary, and left her office with purpose in her stride. In the chapel parking lot, she slid behind the wheel of her modest sedan, placed the photograph on the passenger seat beside her, and said a brief prayer for guidance. Then she turned the key in the ignition and pulled away from St. Cecilia's, heading toward the old East Wing property and the ghosts of her past. The winding road leading from St. Cecilia's to the East Wing property carried Sister Margaret through changing landscapes. The institution's neat buildings and gardens gave way to scattered homes, which eventually surrendered to the encroaching wilderness. Tall pines crowded the roadside, their shadows dappling the asphalt as she drove. The journey took approximately 20 minutes, giving Sister Margaret ample time to reflect. She found herself recalling the numerous times she had made the same drive in the weeks following the girl's disappearance. Back then, her car had been filled with missing person flyers bearing Becca's face, and her heart had been buoyed by desperate hope. Now she carried only memories and a resigned acceptance of the mystery that had shaped her life. As the road narrowed and began to climb into a small hillside, Sister Margaret slowed her vehicle. The East Wing had been situated on a separate plot of land, accessible via a modest dirt road that branched off from the main highway. She scanned the roadside, looking for the familiar turnoff. When she reached what she believed to be the correct location, Sister Margaret frowned in confusion. Instead of the simple dirt path she remembered, she found a paved private road, blocked by an ornate gate. A no trespassing sign was displayed alongside smaller notices warning of private property. "This can't be right," she muttered, pulling her car to the side of the road. She consulted the photograph she had brought, comparing the background landscape to what she could see from her position. The rolling hills in the distance matched, as did the particular arrangement of taller pines on the ridgeline. This was indeed the correct location. But where was any trace of the East Wing? Sister Margaret exited her vehicle and approached the gate on foot. Beyond it, she could see the private road stretching into the woods, but there was no sign of any building. Instead, the area appeared to have been extensively landscaped, with ornamental trees and shrubs lining the driveway. Bewildered, she reached for her cell phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found the number for Francis Murphy, the longtime groundskeeper of St. Cecilia's. They hadn't spoken in years, but Sister Margaret hoped the man might still be in the area and able to provide some explanation. The phone rang several times before a gruff voice answered. "Hello? Francis, this is Sister Margaret Donovan from St. Cecilia's." There was a pause, then recognition. "Sister Margaret, it's been quite some time. How are you?" "I'm well, thank you, Francis," she replied, though it wasn't entirely true. "I'm standing at what I believe to be the entrance to the old East Wing property, but the building appears to be gone completely." Another pause, longer this time. "That's right, sister. The diocese sold the property years ago in 1997. It was bought by a man named Victor Blackwood. He demolished what was left of the East Wing." Sister Margaret felt a chill despite the warmth of the day. "I never heard anything about the property being sold, let alone demolished." "Well, after what happened with the girls, the place stood empty for months. Then there was that incident with the roof collapsing and nearly injuring poor Thomas Frell. The bishop decided it wasn't worth the upkeep, especially with all the unpleasant associations." Sister Margaret found herself staring at the no trespassing sign with growing unease. "This Victor Blackwood, does he still own the property?" "Oh yes," Francis confirmed. "He's got quite a spread back there now. His main house is a ways in, near where the woods get thicker. The East Wing site is just part of his estate." "I see," Sister Margaret said slowly. "I had hoped to visit the old building today for personal reasons. It's the anniversary, you know." Francis's voice softened with understanding. "Of course. It's been 27 years today, hasn't it? I'm sorry you came all this way for nothing, sister. Do you know if Mr. Blackwood is generally receptive to visitors? Perhaps if I explain the situation." "To be honest, he's not known for his hospitality," Francis replied cautiously. "Bit of a recluse from what I hear. Keeps to himself, doesn't mix much with the locals." Sister Margaret sighed, disappointment settling heavily on her shoulders. "Well, thank you for the information, Francis. I appreciate it." "Listen, sister," Francis said, his tone brightening slightly. "I still live nearby, not 15 minutes from where you are now. I saved some items from the East Wing when it was being demolished. An old statue of St. Cecilia, some photographs, things like that. You're welcome to come see them if you'd like." "That's very kind of you," Sister Margaret replied. "Perhaps I will, but first, I think I'd like to try speaking with Mr. Blackwood. Do you know how I might reach his main house?" Francis hesitated. "Well, there's the private road you're looking at, but that gate's always locked. There's a public road that loops around, though. It'll take you near enough to the property." After receiving directions from Francis, Sister Margaret thanked him and ended the call. She returned to her car, conflicted about her next move. Part of her felt she should respect Victor Blackwood's privacy and head straight to Francis's home instead, but a stronger impulse propelled her toward the public road that would lead to Blackwood's estate. 20 minutes later, Sister Margaret found herself driving along a narrow lane that skirted the edge of what must have been Blackwood's property. Through gaps in the trees, she caught glimpses of manicured grounds and eventually a substantial structure that resembled a mountain lodge more than a conventional house. The building was impressive, 3 stories of natural stone and timber, with expansive windows and multiple terraces overlooking the forest. It spoke of wealth that seemed at odds with the modest rural surroundings. Sister Margaret located a small parking area near what appeared to be a service entrance to the property. She parked her car, straightened her habit, and approached the imposing residence with a mixture of determination and apprehension. As she neared the front entrance, a stone pathway led her past carefully tended gardens and a small decorative pond. The craftsmanship of the place was undeniable, yet Sister Margaret couldn't help but feel a sense of disquiet. She climbed the steps to the front, a door, and knocked firmly on the heavy oak panel. The door swung open almost immediately, revealing a tall, athletic man in his early 60s, dressed in expensive exercise attire. His silver hair was neatly trimmed, and in one hand he held a leather dog leash. The man's expression shifted from neutral expectation to unmistakable displeasure as he registered Sister Margaret's religious habit. "Yes?" he asked, not bothering to disguise the impatience in his tone. "Good afternoon," Sister Margaret said with a warm smile. "Are you Mr. Victor Blackwood?" The man's jaw tightened. "I am, and you are trespassing on private property." "I apologize for arriving unannounced. My name is Sister Margaret Donovan from St. Cecilia's Home for Girls in Millfield." She extended her hand, but Victor Blackwood made no move to take it. "What do you want?" Blackwood demanded, his fingers tightening around the dog leash. Sister Margaret lowered her hand, maintaining her calm demeanor despite the hostility. "I was hoping I might have a few minutes of your time. You see, I visited the site where St. Cecilia's East Wing used to stand, and I was surprised to find it gone. If you already saw it's not there, why come bothering me?" Blackwood's voice had taken on an edge that was almost a snarl. "I spoke with Francis Murphy, the former groundskeeper. He mentioned you had purchased the property. I simply wanted to pay to what? Blame me for buying land that was for sale?" Blackwood stepped forward aggressively, causing Sister Margaret to take an involuntary step back. "Are you one of those who thinks that ground is somehow sacred? The diocese didn't think so when they sold it." "No, no," Sister Margaret said quickly, raising her hands in a placating gesture. "I don't blame you at all. I was just curious about the circumstances. The East Wing held personal significance for me, and I wasn't aware it had been demolished." Blackwood seemed momentarily mollified, though his expression remained cold. "Well, now you know. It's gone, and good riddance. I sleep better knowing that architectural monstrosity is no longer casting shadows over my property." Sister Margaret couldn't help but respond to this. "The East Wing was built to shelter orphaned children, Mr. Blackwood. For many generations, it provided a home for those who had none." "Oh, spare me," Blackwood scoffed. "I know the history of this place better than you might imagine. Those homes for children weren't always the sanctuaries of mercy the Church pretends." The conversation was clearly not progressing in a positive direction. Sister Margaret decided to try a different approach. "I understand you value your privacy, Mr. Blackwood, and I've intruded on your time. I apologize for that. Perhaps we could speak another day when it's more convenient for you." "There won't be another day," Blackwood said flatly. "I have no interest in discussing a building that hasn't existed for decades with a nun I've never met before. Now, I suggest you leave before I call the sheriff and report you for trespassing." Sister Margaret nodded, recognizing the futility of continuing. "Very well. Thank you for your time, Mr. Blackwood. Peace be with you." Blackwood's only response was to close the door firmly in her face. With a heavy sigh, Sister Margaret turned and made her way back down the stone path toward her car. The encounter had left her feeling both disappointed and unsettled. There had been something in Blackwood's manner beyond mere rudeness that suggested a deeper antipathy toward the church and its representatives. As she reached her vehicle, Sister Margaret glanced back at the imposing house. Was it merely her imagination, or was Blackwood watching her from one of the upper windows? The sensation of being observed prickled at the back of her neck. She slid into the driver's seat and started the engine, torn between returning to Millfield and stopping at Francis Murphy's home, as the man had invited her to do. Perhaps seeing some of the preserved items from the East Wing would provide the closure she had sought by coming here today. As she drove away from Blackwood's estate, Sister Margaret found herself taking the road that would pass near the former. Sight of the East Wing. She couldn't explain the compulsion. After all, she now knew there was nothing to see, but something drew her back in that direction. The car rounded a bend, bringing her within view of the approximate location where the East Wing had once stood. Through a gap in the trees, she could make out a cleared area where the building had been, now landscaped with ornamental shrubs. Suddenly, the car's radio crackled to life, emitting a strange, haunting sound. Sister Margaret started, her hands tightening on the steering wheel. The sound was unmistakable, a children's choir, singing a hymn she had taught the girls at St. Cecilia's. But the radio was off. She distinctly remembered turning it off when she left Millfield. Sister Margaret pulled the car to the side of the road and stared at the radio in bewilderment. The singing continued for several seconds, then faded away as abruptly as it had begun. "What on earth?" she murmured, reaching out to touch the radio dial. She turned it on and then off again, but the mysterious singing did not return. Had she imagined it? A trick of an exhausted mind, perhaps? Or some strange electrical malfunction in her aging vehicle? Yet, as she sat there, a peculiar sensation washed over her. The same feeling she had experienced earlier while looking at the photograph in her office. A tugging at her heart, an inexplicable certainty that she was meant to be here now for a purpose she did not yet understand. The hair on her arms stood on end, and a warmth spread through her chest. Physical sensations she had experienced before in moments of intense prayer or spiritual insight. In seminary, her spiritual director had taught her to recognize these as potential movements of the Holy Spirit. Once more, the faint singing emanated from the silent radio, and this time Sister Margaret was certain she wasn't imagining it. It was as if an otherworldly voice was calling to her, guiding her. Without fully understanding her own actions, Sister Margaret executed a careful U-turn and drove back toward the gate that blocked access to the former East Wing site. Whatever was happening, she felt compelled to investigate further, even if it meant risking another confrontation with the unwelcoming Victor Blackwood. Sister Margaret parked her car on the side of the road near the gate that marked the entrance to Victor Blackwood's property. The no trespassing signs loomed before her, their warnings clear and unambiguous. She sat for a moment, hands still on the steering wheel, questioning the wisdom of what she was contemplating. "Lord, guide my actions," she whispered. "If I am about to err in judgment, show me the right path." But the strange sensation of spiritual prompting persisted, and after a final moment of hesitation, Sister Margaret exited her vehicle. She approached the gate cautiously, fully aware that she was considering trespassing on private property, an action difficult to reconcile with her moral obligations as a nun. Yet the mysterious singing from her radio had awakened something. In her, a conviction that transcended ordinary concerns. Rather than attempting to breach the gate itself, Sister Margaret began to walk along the perimeter fence, seeking a vantage point from which to view the former East Wing site. The fence was substantial, 8 feet of ornate but sturdy metal, but it followed the contours of the uneven forest terrain, occasionally dipping closer to the ground where the land rose beneath it. As she walked, Sister Margaret closed her eyes briefly, trying to visualize the layout of the East Wing as it had once been. If her memory served her correctly, the stone steps where the girls had been photographed had stood to the east of the main building, near a large oak tree. Opening her eyes, she scanned the property beyond the fence, attempting to locate landmarks that might have survived the demolition. The oak tree was gone, presumably removed during Blackwood's renovations, but a cluster of pines that had stood behind the east wing remained, providing a reference point. Sister Margaret continued along the fence line, moving toward the area where she believed the building had stood. As she walked, her foot suddenly caught on an exposed tree root, sending her stumbling forward. She reached out to catch herself, her hands grasping the metal fence, but the momentum of her fall caused her weight to press against a section where the fence posts were set in uneven ground. There was a sharp, cracking sound as the weakened joint of the fence gave way, creating a gap large enough for a person to squeeze through. Sister Margaret found herself sprawled partially onto Blackwood's property, the broken section of fence beneath her. "Oh, dear Lord," she muttered, picking herself up and brushing soil from her habit. She had not intended to damage the fence, let alone create a means of entry onto the private land. Yet here she was, faced with an unexpected opportunity or temptation. Sister Margaret glanced back toward the road, ensuring no one had witnessed her accidental vandalism. The area was deserted, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the day afternoon breeze. She looked down at the broken fence, then at the clearing beyond where the east wing had once stood. "Forgive me," she whispered, crossing herself before carefully stepping through the gap in the fence. Once on Blackwood's property, Sister Margaret moved swiftly but cautiously toward the former east wing site. The area had been landscaped with non-native ornamental plants that seemed out of place against the backdrop of the natural Maine forest. Nothing remained to indicate that a place of shelter for orphaned children had ever existed here. No foundation stones, no cross, no memorial of any kind. The absence struck Sister Margaret as particularly sad. It was as if Victor Blackwood had deliberately erased all traces of the East Wing's existence, removing not just the building, but its very memory from the land. As she stood contemplating this, a flash of reflected light caught her eye, something near the ground, partially hidden by decorative shrubbery. Curious, Sister Margaret moved closer and parted the branches to reveal a metal plate set into the earth, like a maintenance access cover, but older and more ornate than she would have expected on this manicured property. Sister Margaret frowned, perplexed. If the east wing had been completely demolished, why would an old access cover remain? And why would a landscaped area with no structures need underground access at all? She crouched beside the metal plate, examining it more closely. The design was vintage, possibly dating back to the late 19th century when the east wing was built, with ornate scrollwork around its edges. It seemed incongruous with the modern minimalist aesthetic of Blackwood's property. As she leaned closer, a sound drifted up through small perforations in the plate, so faint that at first Sister Margaret thought she had imagined it. But then it came again, a soft melodic humming, followed by what sounded distinctly like a human cough. Sister Margaret's blood ran cold. The humming was reminiscent of the children's choir she had heard on her car radio, but this was no electrical glitch or figment of her imagination. Someone was below ground, beneath what had once been St. Cecilia's East Wing. "Hello," she called, softly through the perforations, but the humming continued, uninterrupted, suggesting the person couldn't hear her from their subterranean location. Sister Margaret straightened up, her mind racing. The implications were disturbing. Why would there be an underground space beneath the former East Wing site? And more importantly, who was down there? She looked around, half expecting to see Victor Blackwood approaching with fury in his eyes. But the property remained quiet and apparently unmonitored, at least in this section. The main house was hidden from view by a stand of trees, and no security cameras were visible in the immediate vicinity. Drawing her cell phone from her pocket, Sister Margaret dialed 911, her hand trembling slightly as she raised the device to her ear. "Now, Evan, what's your emergency?" A dispatcher's voice answered. "My name is Sister Margaret Donovan," she said, keeping her voice low despite the apparent solitude. "I'm at the property of Victor Blackwood, near the former site of St. Cecilia's East Wing off Route 47. She hesitated, suddenly aware of how strange her report would sound. I believe someone may be trapped underground. I can hear singing and coughing coming from beneath a metal access plate. There was a brief silence on the other end. Sister, are you saying you suspect someone is being held against their will? Don't know, Sister Margaret admitted, but there appears to be an underground space of some kind, and someone is definitely down there. Given the remote location and the fact that this property is private, I'm concerned. Are you on the property? Legally, sister, the dispatcher asked, a note of skepticism entering her voice. Sister Margaret winced. I accidentally damaged a section of fence and found myself on the property. I realize I'm trespassing, but this seemed like an emergency situation. I understand. What is your exact location on the property? Sister Margaret described her position as best she could, explaining that she was near where St. Cecilia's East Wing had formerly stood. We'll send officers to investigate, the dispatcher assured her. Please remain where you are until they arrive, unless you feel you're in danger. Thank you, Sister Margaret replied, relief washing over her. I'll wait by my vehicle, which is parked on the roadside near the main gate. After ending the call, Sister Margaret took one last look at the mysterious metal plate. The humming had stopped, but as she listened intently, she could still hear occasional sounds of movement from below. Someone was definitely down there, and the thought sent a chill down her spine. She made her way back to the broken section of fence, carefully squeezing through the gap and returning to the public road. As she walked toward her parked car, she dialed Francis Murphy's number, feeling an urgent need to gather more information before the police arrived. Francis, it's Sister Margaret again. I need to ask you something important. When the East Wing was still standing, was there any kind of basement or underground room beneath it? Francis sounded surprised by the question. No, sister. The East Wing was built on a raised foundation with a small crawl space for plumbing access, but no proper basement, no large rooms, nothing like that. Why do you ask? Sister Margaret explained what she had discovered, the metal access plate and the sounds coming from below ground. That's impossible, Francis said firmly. There was never any substantial underground structure at the East Wing. I maintained that property for over 30 years. I would know. Then the only explanation is that someone built it after the East Wing was demolished, Sister Margaret concluded. When Victor Blackwood took ownership. That's disturbing, Francis admitted. What are you going to do? I've already called the police. They're sending officers to investigate. I'll come too, Francis decided. I know that property better than anyone. I can be there in 10 minutes. Sister Margaret thanked him and ended the call, then settled into her car to wait, fingering her rosary beads and murmuring prayers for whoever might be trapped beneath the earth where St. Cecilia's East Wing had once stood. Sister Margaret sat in her parked car, fingers moving methodically over the smooth beads of her rosary as she recited the familiar prayers. The ritual brought a measure of calm to her troubled mind, though questions continued to swirl beneath the surface of her concentration. Who could possibly be below ground at the former East Wing site? What purpose could an underground chamber serve in such a remote location? And most disturbing of all, could there be any connection to the disappearance of the 12 girls 27 years ago? The last question seemed far-fetched, even to Sister Margaret. 27 years was an impossibly long time for anyone to remain concealed. Yet the timing of her discovery on the very anniversary of the disappearance struck her as more than mere coincidence. A vehicle approaching from the direction of town interrupted her thoughts. It was a battered pickup truck that Sister Margaret recognized as belonging to Francis Murphy. The former groundskeeper pulled up behind her sedan and emerged from the cab, his weathered face etched with concern. "Sister Margaret," Francis called as he approached. "Any sign of the police yet?" "Not yet," Sister Margaret replied, stepping out to greet him. "Thank you for coming so quickly." Francis nodded, his eyes scanning the road and the gated entrance to Blackwood's property. "Been thinking about what you told me. It makes no sense. If Blackwood built something underground where the East Wing stood, people would have noticed the construction. You can't exactly dig a basement without heavy equipment, unless it was done gradually over time." Sister Margaret suggested. Or perhaps there was already some natural cavity in the ground that he expanded. Francis shook his head doubtfully. This area doesn't have caves or anything like that. It's mostly clay and bedrock beneath a few feet of soil. Before they could speculate further, the distinctive sound of approaching sirens reached them. A police cruiser rounded the bend, lights flashing but siren fading as it pulled up in front of Sister Margaret's car. Two officers emerged, one older with graying hair at his temples, the other younger, and lean with an alertness in her movements. That suggested military background. Their badges identified them as officers from the Millfield Police Department. Sister Donovan, the older officer asked, approaching with a professional but not unfriendly demeanor. Yes, officer, thank you for coming. Sister Margaret gestured to her companion. This is Francis Murphy, the former groundskeeper of St. Cecilia's East Wing that once stood on this property. The older officer nodded in acknowledgement. I'm Detective Collins, and this is Detective Reyes. Dispatch says you reported hearing sounds coming from an underground location on private property. Can you walk us through exactly what you discovered? Otendi, Sister Margaret explained the circumstances that had brought her to the area, her accidental breaching of the fence and the discovery of the metal plate with sounds emanating from below. She was careful to emphasize her contrition for the trespassing, which Detective Collins acknowledged with a small wave of his hand. Let's focus on the potential welfare issue first, the detective said. If someone is indeed trapped or being held against their will, that takes precedence over a minor trespassing incident. Francis interjected. I maintained the East Wing for over 30 years before it was sold. There was never any underground structure associated with the building. Whatever's there now was built after Victor Blackwood took ownership. The younger officer, Detective Reyes, who had been quietly taking notes, looked up. Mr. Blackwood is a prominent landowner in these parts. These are serious implications. I understand that, Sister Margaret said solemnly. I'm not accusing Mr. Blackwood of anything. I'm simply reporting what I heard and expressing concern for whoever might be down there. Detective Collins nodded thoughtfully. Fair enough. Let's take a look at this access plate you discovered. Mr. Murphy, since you're familiar with the property, would you mind accompanying us? Not at all, Francis agreed. The four walked toward the damaged section of fence. Sister Margaret pointed out the gap she had inadvertently created, and they carefully made their way through onto Blackwood's property. Sister Margaret led them to the ornamental shrubbery that partially concealed the metal plate. Here it is, she said, parting the branches to reveal the rusted metal. Detective Collins crouched beside it, examining the plate with a practiced eye. This is old craftsmanship. Doesn't match the modern landscaping at all. Detective Reyes joined him, shining a flashlight through the perforations. Can't see much, just darkness below. Listen, Sister Margaret urged. Just be quiet for a moment. The four fell silent, straining to hear any sound from below. For nearly a minute, there was nothing but the ambient noise of the forest, birds calling, leaves rustling. Sister Margaret began to worry that whoever had been below had either moved away from the plate or had fallen silent upon hearing voices above. Then, faintly but distinctly, a woman's voice began to hum. The melody was haunting, archaic, a fragment of amazing grace that Sister Margaret had taught the girls at St. Cecilia's. Despite its broken, wavering quality, the tune was unmistakable. Francis's face paled. That's the hymn the choir used to sing at Sunday services. The humming continued for several more seconds, then faded, replaced by the sound of labored breathing and a dry, rasping cough. The officers exchanged significant glances. Detective Reyes straightened up, her expression now grave. That's definitely someone down there, and from the sound of that cough, they may need medical attention. We need to speak with Mr. Blackwood immediately, Detective Collins decided. This is now a welfare check at minimum. I don't understand, Francis said, shaking his head in bewilderment. This access plate wasn't here when the East Wing stood, and there was never any basement or underground room. How could anyone be down there? "That's what we aim to find out," Detective Collins replied, his tone suggesting he had shifted fully into investigative mode. "Let's head to Blackwood's residence." The four made their way back to the road and their respective vehicles. Following, the police cruiser, Sister Margaret and Francis, drove the short distance to Victor Blackwood's main house. The imposing structure seemed more forbidding than ever as they approached, its many windows like watchful eyes surveying their arrival. Detective Collins instructed Sister Margaret and Francis to remain by their vehicles, while he and Detective Reyes approached the front door. Sister Margaret watched as the officers knocked and waited, tension evident in their postures despite their professional demeanor. Several moments passed before the door opened, but it wasn't Victor Blackwood who emerged. Instead, the group saw him approaching from the rear of the property, still dressed in his exercise clothes and leading a large German shepherd on a leash. His expression shifted rapidly from polite inquiry to barely contained fury when he spotted Sister Margaret and Francis standing near the officer's cruiser. "What is the meaning of this?" Blackwood demanded as he reached the front steps. "Why are these trespassers on my property again?" Detective Collins introduced himself and his partner, explaining the purpose of their visit in measured tones. "We received a report of sounds coming from what appears to be an underground structure at the former East Wing site. We'd like to ask you a few questions about that, sir." Blackwood's face flushed with anger. "This is outrageous. First, this nun shows up uninvited, trespasses through my fence and on my land, and now she's making wild accusations and wasting police resources." "No one is making accusations, Mr. Blackwood," Detective Reyes said calmly. "We're simply following up on a welfare concern. Someone appears to be in an underground space on your property, and they sound like they may need medical attention." "That's absurd," Blackwood snapped. "There's no one on my property except me and my dogs. I would know if someone were living in a secret underground bunker. Do you realize how ridiculous that sounds?" "Nevertheless, sir, we're obligated to investigate," Detective Collins said firmly. "We'd like permission to check your home and grounds, including any basement areas." "Absolutely not." Blackwood's hand tightened on the dog's leash, causing the animal to shift restlessly. "This is private property. You have no right to search without a warrant." "Mr. Blackwood," Detective Reyes began, her tone reasonable but insistent, "if there's someone in distress on your property, even a trespasser you're unaware of, wouldn't you want to know about it? This could be a squatter who's found their way into some old structure you don't even know exists." Blackwood's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "There are no old structures I don't know about. I've owned this land for over 25 years. I know every inch of it." "Then what about the metal access plate near the former East Wing site?" Detective Collins asked. "The one that appears to access an underground space?" For a fraction of a second, something flickered in Blackwood's expression, a momentary faltering that Sister Margaret caught before the man's face hardened once, more into obstinate refusal. "I installed a drainage system when I landscaped that area," Blackwood said dismissively. "What you're calling an access plate is probably just a decorative cover for a drain. There's nothing sinister about it." "A drainage system doesn't sing hymns or cough, Mr. Blackwood," Detective Collins observed dryly. Blackwood turned his glare towards Sister Margaret. "This woman has clearly orchestrated this entire situation. She probably brought some device that plays recorded sounds and planted it near the drain. She's harassing me because she resents that I bought church property." "I would never do such a thing," Sister Margaret protested, crossing herself. "As God is my witness, I heard a woman's voice coming from beneath that plate. We all heard it just now." Blackwood scoffed. "A nun invoking God while trespassing and lying. How very typical." "That's enough, Mr. Blackwood," Detective Collins said sharply. "We're asking for your voluntary cooperation. If you refuse, we'll have no choice but to pursue other legal avenues." "Then pursue them," Blackwood replied coldly. "In the meantime, I want these people off my property immediately. If they're not gone in 2 minutes, I'll file trespassing charges against all of you." Recognizing the impasse, Detective Collins nodded to Sister Margaret and Francis, indicating they should return to their vehicles. The officers followed, walking back to their cruiser with measured steps that suggested this retreat was strategic rather than final. As they reached the police car, Detective Collins spoke quietly to Sister Margaret. "Don't worry, sister. This isn't over. I'm going to contact dispatch and request information on the property deed, ownership history, and any prior complaints or incidents at this location. I also want to review the file on those missing girls from 1996. Something's not right here." Sister Margaret nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Detective. I know how strange this must seem, but I truly believe someone needs help down there." "I believe you. We all heard something," the detective replied. "Whether it's exactly what you think, we'll determine that with proper investigation. Head back to Francis's place for now. We'll be in touch." The drive to Francis Murphy's home was brief, but tense, with both Sister Margaret and the former groundskeeper lost in their thoughts about the mysterious voice beneath the former East Wing grounds. Francis's house proved to be a modest cabin set back from the main road, surrounded by towering pines that cast long shadows in the late afternoon sun. "Not much, but it's home," Francis said as he led Sister Margaret inside. The interior was simply furnished but comfortable, with well-worn furniture and walls decorated with fishing memorabilia and a few framed photographs. "It's very welcoming," Sister Margaret replied sincerely, noting the cross hanging prominently above the stone fireplace. Francis busied himself in the small kitchen, preparing tea, while Sister Margaret settled into an armchair. "I kept several items from the East Wing when it was decommissioned," Francis called over his shoulder. "They're in a trunk in the spare room. I'll show you after we've had our tea." Sister Margaret nodded, her mind still preoccupied with the access plate and the haunting voice that had emerged from beneath it. "Francis, why do you think the diocese never informed me about the East Wing being sold? I was at St. Cecilia's all those years ago, and my niece was among the missing girls. Surely someone should have consulted me." Francis returned with 2 steaming mugs, handing one to Sister Margaret before taking a seat opposite her. "The decision came from the bishop's office in Portland," he said. "I don't think it was handled well, to be honest. After what happened with the girls, attendance at services in the East Wing chapel dropped significantly. Then there was that incident with the bell tower." "What exactly happened?" Sister Margaret asked, sipping the hot tea gratefully. "Structural failure," Francis explained. "The East Wing was built in the 1890s, and maintenance had been minimal. One Sunday morning in 1997, the bell tower developed a large crack. The old bell must have weighed 300 pounds, came crashing down, nearly killed poor Thomas Frell, who was filling in as groundskeeper while I was laid up with a broken leg. Was anyone hurt? By the grace of God, no, but it was the final straw for the diocese. They declared the building unsafe and closed it immediately. By early 1997, they decided to decommission it entirely rather than pay for repairs." Sister Margaret frowned. "And Victor Blackwood purchased it soon after?" "That's right. Paid cash. From what I heard, more than the land was worth, which raised a few eyebrows. But the diocese needed funds for renovations at the cathedral, so they didn't ask questions." "What did Blackwood do with the property immediately after purchase?" Francis's brow furrowed in recollection. "Demolished the East Wing right away. Had a crew out there within days. There were some protests from locals who thought the building could have been saved, but legally there was nothing they could do. After that, he started landscaping the grounds, but he never built anything substantial on the East Wing site itself." "Did you notice any unusual construction activity? Anything that might suggest he was building something underground?" "Nothing obvious," Francis replied, then paused. "Although there was a period in 1998 when people reported hearing strange noises at night, machinery running, that sort of thing, and some folks complained about tremors." Sister Margaret leaned forward, her interest piqued. "Tremors? Like earthquakes?" "That's what the authorities concluded, minor seismic activity. But it seemed odd that it was localized to that specific area. Some people wondered if Blackwood was doing some kind of excavation work, and no one investigated further. Francis shrugged. A deputy came out, looked around, found nothing suspicious, and that was that. Blackwood has always been well connected, donates to the right causes, knows the right people. The conversation drifted to other topics. The changes in Millfield over the years, the declining enrollment at St. Cecilia's, and theological discussions that reflected both Sister Margaret's and Francis's deep faith. Time passed swiftly, and Sister Margaret was surprised when her phone rang, breaking the comfortable rhythm of their conversation. "Sister Donovan speaking," she answered. "Sister, this is Detective Collins." The officer's voice sounded energized, purposeful. "I've made some progress. I spoke with Judge Martinez, who's sympathetic to our concerns. She's granted an emergency warrant for a welfare search based on the reasonable suspicion of unlawful confinement." Sister Margaret felt a surge of hope. "That's excellent news, Detective. We'll be heading back to Blackwood's property within the hour. I wanted to let you know, though I must advise you to stay away for safety reasons. This is now an official police operation." "I understand," Sister Margaret replied, though her desire to be present was powerful. "But, Detective, if you do find something or someone, you'll be the first civilian I call," Collins promised. "This whole situation began because of your persistence, Sister. I respect that." After Francis overheard the conversation, he insisted they should at least be able to observe from a distance, arguing that their spiritual presence might be important if something significant was discovered. With some reluctance, Detective Collins agreed they could remain in their vehicle at a safe distance, but strictly as observers. An hour later, Sister Margaret and Francis parked along the public road near the entrance to Blackwood's property. From their position, they could see multiple police vehicles arriving, including a forensic van and an ambulance staging nearby, a precaution that sent a chill down Sister Margaret's spine. Detective Collins approached their car briefly. "We're going in with the warrant. I've set up my body camera to stream to this channel." He showed them how to access the feed on Sister Margaret's phone. "You can watch from here, but do not approach under any circumstances. Is that clear?" Both nodded in agreement, and Detective Collins returned to his colleagues. They watched as the assembled officers approached Blackwood's front door, warrant in hand. Through the phone screen, they observed as Blackwood answered the door, his face contorting with rage at the sight of the officers and the document they presented. The audio was muffled, but clear enough to hear him protesting vigorously, threatening lawsuits and calls to his attorney. Despite his objections, the officers executed their search warrant methodically, examining the main house while Blackwood was kept under supervision in his living room. After approximately 45 minutes, Detective Collins reported through the body camera that the house and conventional basement had yielded nothing suspicious. Moving on to the grounds and outbuildings. Now, Collins narrated for the benefit of those monitoring the feed. "Mr. Blackwood has confirmed there's a storage shed along the private road connecting his main house to the former East Wing site." Sister Margaret and Francis watched intently as the officers, accompanied by a visibly furious Blackwood, made their way along the forest road. The path was well maintained but narrow, winding between ancient trees that created a tunnel-like effect in the fading daylight. After about 15 minutes of walking, the camera showed a modest wooden structure, the storage shed Blackwood had mentioned. It was larger than Sister Margaret had expected, perhaps 20 feet square, with weathered siding and a metal roof. "This is just a tool shed," Blackwood could be heard saying. "Garden equipment, maintenance supplies, that sort of thing. Complete. Waste of your time." The officers methodically searched the building, which did indeed contain an assortment of tools, lawn equipment, and gardening supplies. The space was dusty and appeared seldom used, with cobwebs in the corners and a musty odor that one officer commented on. As the search was nearing completion, there was a sudden noise. One of the officers had dropped a heavy wrench, which landed on the wooden floor with an unexpectedly hollow sound. The camera panned down to show Detective Reyes kneeling, tapping experimentally on the floorboards. "This section sounds different," she observed, removing her flashlight to examine the area more closely. "These boards look newer than the others." Despite Blackwood's renewed protests, the officers began to remove the suspicious floorboards. Beneath them, they discovered a stone staircase descending into darkness. "Mr. Blackwood," Detective Collins said, his voice carrying clearly through the body camera's microphone, "would you care to explain this?" Blackwood's face had gone pale, his earlier bluster replaced by tense silence. When he refused to comment, Collins instructed several officers to remain with him while he and Detective Reyes prepared to descend the staircase. "Switching to tactical lights," Collins narrated as he activated a powerful flashlight. "We're proceeding into the underground passageway." The camera showed a narrow stone staircase that appeared to have been carved directly into the bedrock. The steps were worn in the center, suggesting regular use over a period of years. At the bottom of the stairs, a heavy wooden door blocked further progress. "Locked," Reyes reported, examining the ancient-looking iron mechanism. "Mr. Blackwood, we need the key to this door," Collins called up. From above, Blackwood's voice called down, still defiant. "I don't know anything about any door. This must have been here when I bought the property." The officers exchanged skeptical glances, and Collins instructed his colleagues to search for a key. One of them noticed a small hollow in the wall beside the staircase, partially concealed by shadow. Inside was an iron key, green with age, but apparently functional. "Found a key," the officer reported, handing it to Collins. The detective inserted the key into the lock, which turned with a loud metallic groan. The door swung inward, revealing a dark tunnel beyond. "We're entering what appears to be a man-made tunnel," Collins narrated, his voice now hushed and tense. "Approximately 6 feet high, 3 feet wide. Walls are stone and earth, supported by wooden beams at regular intervals. Evidence of relatively recent construction, despite attempts to make it appear older." The officers proceeded cautiously through the tunnel, which extended for what appeared to be several hundred feet. The passage curved slightly, and Sister Margaret realized with a jolt that it must lead in the direction of the former East Wing site. After a few minutes of walking, the tunnel widened into a small chamber. The camera's light revealed crude furnishings, a thin mattress on the floor, a bucket in the corner, a small table with the remains of what looked like food. And then, from the shadows, came a whispered voice. "Help! Is someone there?" "Detective." Collins directed his light toward the sound, and the camera revealed a frail woman lying on the mattress. Her face was gaunt, her eyes sunken but alert. Her brown hair was closely cropped, and she clutched what appeared to be a hand-carved wooden cross. "Ma'am," Collins said gently, approaching slowly to avoid frightening her. "I'm Detective Collins from the Millfield Police Department. We're here to help you. Can you tell me your name?" The woman's cracked lips moved, forming words with visible effort. Rebecca Donovan." In Francis's car, Sister Margaret gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Tears sprang to her eyes as she whispered, "Becca, it's Becca." Francis placed a steadying hand on her arm, his own expression one of shock and disbelief. Through the body camera, they could see that the small chamber was lined with carvings, crosses, angels, biblical scenes, all apparently created from scraps of wood and stone. A single candle stood on the makeshift table, long since burnt out. On one wall, a large cross had been meticulously etched into the stone. "Rebecca," Detective Collins was saying, his voice professional but kind, "we're going to get you medical attention right away. Can you tell me if there's anyone else down here with you?" The woman's gaze shifted to a dark corner of the chamber where the camera's light had not yet reached. "Lily," she whispered, "but she's gone to God now. Many years ago." The camera panned to reveal what appeared to be human remains, a skeleton lying on a similar mattress, partially covered with a tattered blanket. "We need the medical team down here immediately," Collins said into his radio, his voice tight with controlled emotion, "and notify the forensic unit that we have human remains as well." Unable to contain herself any longer, Sister Margaret bolted from the car. Ignoring Francis's protests, she ran toward the police perimeter where an officer attempted to intercept her. "Please," Sister Margaret begged. "That's my niece they found." "I'm Sister Margaret Donovan. She's been missing for 27 years. I must see her." The officer, recognizing the name from the earlier briefing, spoke into his radio. After a brief consultation, he escorted Sister Margaret through the perimeter to where the forensic team and paramedics were preparing to enter the tunnel. "Wait here, Sister," the officer instructed. "They'll be bringing her out soon." Time seemed to stretch as Sister Margaret waited, alternately praying and attempting to process the reality of what was happening. After what felt like an eternity, activity at the shared entrance increased. Officers emerged, followed by paramedics carefully carrying a stretcher. On it lay Rebecca Donovan, so thin and fragile she barely made an outline beneath the blanket covering her. As they passed where Sister Margaret stood, Rebecca's head turned slightly and their eyes met. Despite the ravages of time and suffering, Sister Margaret recognized her niece in those eyes that had once sparkled with childish joy, now wells of unfathomable experience. Her lips moved, and though no sound emerged, Sister Margaret could read the words she formed, "God never left me." As the paramedics rushed her toward the waiting ambulance, another group emerged from the shed, carrying a body bag, the remains of Lily Chen, Sister Margaret presumed. The sight sent a new wave of grief through her, tempered by the miracle of her niece's survival. In the midst of the activity, she spotted Victor Blackwood being led away in handcuffs, the man's earlier arrogance replaced by a sullen, defeated expression. As Blackwood passed where Sister Margaret stood, he suddenly lunged forward and spat directly at her, the spittle landing on her cheek. "Proud of yourself, sister?" Blackwood snarled before officers yanked him back. Sister Margaret wiped her face calmly, her voice steady as she replied, "I count it for joy that I have suffered just like my Lord." As Blackwood was led away, Sister Margaret overheard fragments of conversation between officers discussing what they had found. One mentioned the discovery of additional skeletal remains in another chamber, speculating they might be the remains of more of the missing girls. Francis appeared at Sister Margaret's side, having followed at a more cautious pace. "The ambulance is ready to leave," he said gently. "We should follow them to the hospital." Sister Margaret nodded, her heart too full for words. Together, they returned to Francis's car and followed the ambulance as it sped away from Victor Blackwood's property, sirens wailing, carrying the miraculous survivor of a 27-year nightmare toward the light of freedom at last. The lights of the emergency room entrance cast harsh shadows across the ambulance bay as the paramedics wheeled Rebecca through the sliding doors. Sister Margaret and Francis had arrived moments behind them, parking hastily and rushing toward the entrance, only to be intercepted by hospital staff. "I'm sorry, sister," a nurse said firmly but compassionately. "You can't go with her right now. The medical team needs space to work. She's in extremely fragile condition." "I understand," Sister Margaret replied, though every fiber of her being yearned to stay by her niece's side. "But I am her only living family. She's been missing for 27 years. I thought she was dead until today." The nurse's expression softened. "The doctors will do everything possible for her. There's a waiting area just down that hallway. I promise someone will come speak with you as soon as possible." Reluctantly, Sister Margaret allowed Francis to guide her to the waiting room, a sterile space with uncomfortable chairs and outdated magazines. The two sat in silence for several minutes, the magnitude of the day's events too overwhelming for casual conversation. Finally, Francis spoke. "It's a miracle, sister. After all these years, to find her alive." "A miracle indeed," Sister Margaret agreed, her voice thick with emotion, "though I fear what she must have endured to survive." "She had her faith," Francis said simply. "Sometimes that's enough." Sister Margaret nodded, drawing comfort from the thought. She recalled the religious carvings that had lined the underground chamber, evidence that even in the darkest captivity, her niece had maintained her devotion to God. "I should call St. Cecilia's," she realized suddenly. The community should know she's been found. As she reached for her phone, it rang in her hand. The screen displayed Detective Collins's number. "Detective," Sister Margaret answered. "I'm at the hospital. My niece is being treated now." "That's good to hear, Sister," Collins replied. "I'm calling to update you on the investigation. We've secured Victor Blackwood in custody, but he's refusing to speak without his attorney present. However, we found something significant when we searched his house more thoroughly, a journal. It appears he's been keeping detailed records for decades." Sister Margaret felt a chill. What kind of records? It's disturbing content, Sister. The journal contains extensive writings about his hatred of religious institutions, particularly Catholic orphanages, and detailed accounts of his activities. "But why?" Sister Margaret asked, struggling to comprehend the depth of hatred necessary to commit such crimes. What possible motivation could he have had? There was a brief hesitation before Collins continued. According to his writings, Blackwood was himself an orphan. He was placed in a Catholic institution similar to St. Cecilia's in the 1960s, where he claims he suffered severe abuse at the hands of the staff. He developed a pathological hatred of religious organizations that care for children, seeing them as facades that hide institutional cruelty. Sister Margaret closed her eyes, a wave of sadness washing over her. "Such brokenness," she murmured. "Such twisted thinking." "There's more, Sister," Collins continued, his voice grim. "The journal details what happened to the other girls. We found the remains of 4 so far, besides Lily Chen. Based on Blackwood's records, it appears that most of the others died within the first few years of captivity. The conditions they were kept in were inhumane. May their souls rest in peace," Sister Margaret whispered, crossing herself. "Your niece is the only survivor." According to Blackwood's entries, she displayed an unusual resilience. He seems to have developed a kind of fascination with her faith. He kept her separate from the others, especially after Lily's death. "And how did she survive when the others didn't?" Sister Margaret asked. Collins hesitated again. "Sister, there are aspects of Blackwood's journal that are particularly distressing. He seemed to view Rebecca as a test subject of sorts, to see how long faith could sustain a person under extreme deprivation. He documented her prayers, her attempts to convert him, her continued belief in eventual rescue. It's remarkable. She maintained her sanity under such conditions." Sister Margaret felt a surge of nausea rising in her throat. "Dear God, I'm sorry, Sister. The evidence indicates he subjected her to severe psychological torture for years. It's a testament to her extraordinary strength that she survived at all." My niece didn't break," Sister Margaret said firmly, as much to herself as to the detective. "Her faith sustained her. The evil belongs entirely to her captor." "Of course, Sister," Collins agreed solemnly. "No one would suggest otherwise." Francis, who had been listening to Sister Margaret's side of the conversation, placed a supportive hand on her shoulder. "There's one more thing you should know," Collins continued. "The journal details how he managed to abduct 12 girls without anyone finding them. It was a meticulously planned operation. Blackwood had been watching St. Cecilia's for months, learning the routines. When he learned that the girls would be temporarily housed in the East Wing during renovations, he saw his opportunity. How did he take them without leaving evidence?" Sister Margaret asked, recalling how the investigation had been hampered by the complete absence of signs of struggle or forced entry. According to his writings, he posed as a maintenance worker sent by the diocese to check the building's ventilation system. He introduced an odorless sedative gas through the air ducts while the girls were sleeping. When they were unconscious, he simply carried them out one by one to a waiting van. The night staff had been reduced because of budget cuts, and the single night watchman was easily avoided. Sister Margaret winced, imagining the scene. And afterward, he removed them to a temporary location, a disused hunting cabin deep in the Pine Hollow woods. Later, after the initial searches died down, he constructed the underground chambers beneath his property and moved them there. The tremors people reported in 1998 were from his excavation work. "And the police investigation?" Sister Margaret asked, remembering the frustration and helplessness she had felt during those early weeks. "Rural investigations in 1996 weren't what they are today," Collins explained. "Resources were limited, forensic techniques were less advanced, and record-keeping was spotty at best. Once the initial searches yielded nothing, the case quickly went cold. Blackwood himself was never considered a suspect. He was wealthy, respected in the community, had no criminal record. And then he bought the East Wing," Sister Margaret concluded, the pieces falling into place. "Exactly. After purchasing the property, he demolished it to ensure no one would ever search there again. Then he constructed the underground chambers directly beneath where the building had stood, connected by the tunnel to his storage shed." "How could no one have noticed?" Francis interjected, his voice raised in indignation. Sister Margaret relayed the question to Collins, who sighed audibly. "It's not something I'm proud to report, but Blackwood's journal suggests he bribed certain officials to ignore complaints and look the other way during the construction. We'll be investigating those allegations thoroughly." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a doctor in scrubs who approached with a clipboard in hand. "Are you Sister Donovan, Rebecca's aunt?" Sister Margaret quickly ended her call, with Detective Collins promising to speak again soon, and turned to the doctor. "Yes, that's me. How is my niece?" The doctor, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes but a serious expression, took a seat across from them. "I'm Dr. Patel. Your niece is in stable condition, but I want to be frank with you. Her health is extremely compromised. She's severely malnourished, has significant muscle atrophy, vitamin D deficiency from lack of sunlight, and shows signs of healed fractures that were never properly treated." Sister Margaret nodded, trying to absorb the clinical assessment of her niece's suffering. "The most immediate concern is reintroducing her to normal environmental conditions," Dr. Patel continued. "After decades underground, her immune system is severely compromised. We need to be careful about potential infections, and her eyes will be sensitive to normal light levels for some time." "When can I see her?" Sister Margaret asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "She's being settled in the ICU now," Dr. Patel replied. "We need to be extremely cautious about visitors. Anyone who enters must wear protective gear, mask, gown, gloves, to minimize the risk of introducing pathogens. Even with those precautions, I can only allow very brief visits initially." "I understand," Sister Margaret said, though the prospect of further delay was agonizing. "I've waited 27 years. I can wait a few more hours to ensure her safety." Dr. Patel smiled gently. "She asked for you, you know. One of the first things she said was her aunt's name. She knew you would find her eventually." Tears welled in Sister Margaret's eyes at this revelation. "She never lost faith." "Apparently not," Dr. Patel agreed. "The paramedics reported that she was clutching a cross made from what looked like wood scraps and thread from clothing. She refused to let them take it, even during treatment." "That sounds like Becca," Sister Margaret said, a sad smile crossing her face. "Her faith was always stronger than mine, even when she was a child." You'll be able to see her in about an hour," Dr. Patel promised, rising to her feet. "A nurse will come get you when she's ready for visitors." As the doctor departed, Sister Margaret turned to Francis. "Would you mind if I spend some time in the chapel? I need to pray." "Of course," Francis replied. "I'll wait here in case there's any news." Sister Margaret made her way to the small hospital chapel, a modest space designed to accommodate various faiths. Finding it empty, she knelt before the simple altar and bowed her head. "Thank you, Lord, for this miracle," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you for preserving my niece through her ordeal. Thank you for leading me to her after all these years." She continued in silent prayer for some time, wrestling with the complex emotions that surged within her. Joy at Rebecca's discovery, grief for her suffering, anger toward her captor, and lingering questions about why God had allowed such evil to persist for so long. Eventually, a sense of peace settled over her. The mysteries of God's ways remained, but Sister Margaret found herself accepting that some questions might never have satisfactory answers in this life. What mattered now was that her niece had been found, and somehow, through unimaginable darkness, her faith had endured. When she returned to the waiting room, Frances was speaking with a nurse who had come to escort Sister Margaret to the ICU. After donning the required protective gear, she followed the nurse through a series of doors to a private room where her niece lay surrounded by medical equipment. The figure in the bed barely resembled the vibrant young girl who had disappeared 27 years ago. Rebecca's face was gaunt, her skin pallid from decades without sunlight. Yet when her eyes opened and found Sister Margaret's, Sister Margaret recognized immediately the inner light that had always defined her niece, a spiritual radiance that even the darkest captivity had failed to extinguish. "Aunt Margaret," she whispered, her voice thin but clear. "You found me." "Becca," Sister Margaret replied, tears streaming beneath her protective mask as she gently took her niece's frail hand in her gloved one. "I never stopped looking, never stopped praying." A ghost of a smile touched Rebecca's cracked lips. "I knew you wouldn't. I told Lily God would send you to us someday." "I'm so sorry it took so long," Sister Margaret said, her voice breaking. Rebecca shook her head slightly. "God's timing, perfect, always perfect." The nurse touched Sister Margaret's shoulder, indicating her visit needed to end. She nodded in understanding. "I'll be right outside," she promised her niece. "I won't leave the hospital. We have so much to talk about when you're stronger." "Tell me one thing," Rebecca whispered as Sister Margaret prepared to leave. "St. Cecilia's, is it still there? Are there still children finding sanctuary?" Sister Margaret smiled beneath her mask. "Yes, Becca, the home still stands. Children still find love and care within its walls." "Good," Rebecca murmured, her eyes drifting closed. Then it was all worth it. As she left the room, Sister Margaret felt a profound sense of wonder at her niece's first concern being for other orphaned children rather than herself. Despite everything she had endured, her priorities remained steadfastly aligned with the compassion that had defined her even as a child. It was a testimony to a faith that transcended circumstances, a faith that had sustained her through 27 years of darkness and would now guide her return to the light.